Meltdown over migrant flights to Martha's Vineyard, Chinese aggression, all this and more on this week's episode of Happy Warriors. Last week, Governor Ron DeSantis gave the go-ahead for the transportation of around 50 Venezuelan, or mostly Venezuelan, migrants to Martha's Vineyard. And this was very controversial. We had a lot of hysterical reaction from Democrats. We had the governor of Massachusetts say this was a humanitarian crisis, sending the National Guard. And a Texas sheriff is now investigating DeSantis for potentially criminal activity. He was unable to say what the particular statutes were that he might have breached, but cited a general human rights concern. We are now going to watch a video of some locals in Martha's Vineyard hugging the migrants as they are on their way out of Martha's Vineyard to a military base. It is a military base, isn't it?
In Cape Cod.
In Cape Cod, yes. So
the Space Force base, I think.
Space. Okay, even better. Okay, we'll watch that. So here we go.
Please. Presidente.
¿Cómo sientes? ¿Bien?
Okay, so scenes of joy and friendship there. Totally believable, not at all fake. Wouldn't you agree, Caroline?
Well, I'd say I think it's a display of kindness towards these migrants from the Martha's Vineyard natives who were totally shocked to get this influx of 48 migrants to their shores. Granted, the shock turned into outrage very quickly from progressive media as well as the people who live in Martha's Vineyard, because they claimed that this was a stunt from the DeSantis administration that was very inhumane, and these migrants weren't given all the information and, explains the conditions of this flight before they embarked on it. But turns out that's not exactly true, that according to the DeSantis administration, they were told where they were going, what was waiting for them there, and those who went on this trip did so voluntarily. So if Martha's Vineyard is a sanctuary city, which it touts itself as one, it's the type of place where you would find locals with signs in the front yard that say, hate has no home here, we don't discriminate against anyone, and no one is illegal. Well, we would expect them to accommodate 48 people. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Martha's Vineyard, but I thought that maybe they would do a bit more to bring them into their community, especially since they spent less than 24 hours there before they were shipped to a military base in Cape Cod. So this reaction we're seeing in this video, these hugging and friendliness, it's a lot of theatrics because they really didn't do very much for them at all.
Right. Jimmy, what do you think? Do you agree with that? This is hypocrisy, performative, liberal virtue signaling?
I mean, there are a few things that are simultaneously true, right? It is a disproportionate response to a move by DeSantis that probably, had a fair amount of trolling involved. So that reaction is going to benefit him in the end, and it's an in-kind contribution to his re-election bid in Florida and an eventual presidential campaign. The other thing, though, is that these are people fleeing an authoritarian socialist regime in Venezuela. And it also puts on the table this conversation about how we as a country react to that, to what extent we should be accommodating that while also hardening our border and preventing this sort of unfettered illegal immigration from happening. So it's a super complicated issue. You have all of these things that are happening at once, but these sorts of visuals are kind of just an illustrative example of the weird politics here.
I think that's right. I think people want to show whatever their message is, they think of these moments, and certainly I'm sure for some of the people in front of a camera, people act differently in front of a camera than maybe they do when there's no camera. this was all designed with camera work in mind. That's why DeSantis did this, is he wanted to capture that initial reaction of outrage and bringing in the National Guard, making the point that, look, this is what people in these border towns deal with every single day. And you ignore them or malign them or say they're xenophobic or whatever. To Jimmy's point, obviously, these migrants are still people. They need, a lot of them need help. But the problem is that Democrats are incentivizing this illegal immigration, which is good for nobody.
Right.
And they're incentivizing it in part through advertising sanctuary cities that they don't really expect to have to deal with it.
And I think the last point is what we can all agree on, that this is the chaos the border crisis has generated. And the blame, obviously, is we have to point it towards the Biden administration and their conduct of immigration enforcement. But ultimately, this was a Trumpian tactic, and I'm not claiming that the optics were incredible, because obviously shipping any humans around looks bad. It looks bad, and they are fleeing a lot of times either oppression or poverty or terrible circumstances that we don't experience in this country. But at the same time, I think it was a teachable moment and also an angering moment for a lot of states and a lot of media outlets, because they had never expected this kind of thing.
So just quickly then, Jimmy, does this hurt or help DeSantis politically?
It's absolutely a boost to DeSantis. When you have all these opponents lined up attacking him, everyone going after him at once, he's the main character. He's the antagonist that Democrats and mainstream media outlets are going up against. And that's exactly where you want to be in a Republican primary heading into 2024. Not that he's actually announced, but it'll set him up really well going forward.
Because he ticks off the right people and he makes the right people happy.
And he's getting people to talk about an issue that is a serious issue that Biden's sort of got away with. I mean, he's not held accountable in the way he ought to be for the border crisis.
Right.
Kamala Harris said recently that there is no border crisis, that the border is secure, and this really shines a light on that.
Yeah, and it's funny, Harris is the one who has that portfolio in the White House, right? She is supposed to be addressing the root causes of migration. But you've seen she isn't even able to work with all of these Central American countries that she actually needs to engage with to address illegal immigration and to create the sort of diplomatic partnerships that the Trump administration did a few years ago.
And I think a last net positive of this incident, however it may unfold, apparently it's still unfolding, because I saw a New York Post piece today claiming that a new bus of migrants was reportedly maybe going to show up at Biden's front door. Don't know if that's been corroborated, but if this is ongoing, we better buckle up. But I think we all probably have more sympathy now for the border towns in Texas, such as Del Rio, that have dealt with this on a massive scale. Martha's Vineyard got 48 migrants. They get thousands, and those communities did not consent to that.
Okay, so let's move into another topic then, and that's Chinese aggression and what the rest of the world does about that. So President Biden recently went on 60 Minutes, where he seemed to take a rather hawkish turn in his foreign policy. The president was asked twice whether US forces would defend Taiwan should China invade, and even clarified that what he meant by this, because he said yes, they would, he meant deploying US troops. It's a pretty big deal for the President of the United States to say that on the record. Jimmy, what do you make of it?
It's a big policy shift. It's not the first time he's said that. It's actually the fourth. And each time he says that, and he comes out and says, we will send U.S. forces to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion, which is not verbatim what he said, but that's the spirit of it. The White House has walked it back. And administration officials have subsequently said each time in comments to reporters, there's no policy change here. That our policy is the same, it's the status quo. But that is just becoming an unsustainable position when President Biden has come out and said this for the fourth time. And And even if, officially speaking, the White House or the State Department have not issued a document or come out with some sort of official pronouncement, at the end of the day, the person who's deciding is President Biden or whoever his successor will be. And what we're going to see is that more and more people are going to take that into account when they're thinking about China and Taiwan. The president decides. And so the Taiwanese get this message. They know to expect American assistance. The Chinese get it. They know that when they make a move, and a lot of people think that they're going to make a move in the next decade on Taiwan, whether it's a full-out invasion, a blockade, or something else, they're going to be met with the full force of the American military. We're talking about, as you said, President Biden talking about sending U.S. forces, American soldiers to defend Taiwan, and that is huge. So it's not unprecedented for Biden to say this because he said it 3 times before, but it's a big story.
So Jimmy, just staying with you, do you think the fact that he said this repeatedly rules out the possibility that it's a gaffe, he's going off script? We've come to expect this from Biden in other areas. You think this is an actual policy shift?
I think it's an actual policy shift. It could be a gaffe insofar as he didn't mean to say it out loud, publicly, but it sounds like it's his view when it's the 4th time that he's come out and talked about it. So I mean, there are a lot of cases where we see the president saying something that maybe doesn't make sense or is a little discombobulated, but this actually does seem to be his view. And now White House officials are they're walking this fine line where, on the one hand, they're trying to walk it back. On the other hand, you have people like Kurt Campbell, who's the top Indo-Pacific coordinator at the White House, a senior official, saying, no, this actually isn't a walk back. This is, what Biden said and what officials said later. These are 2 consistent positions, which they don't seem to be because the policy clearly has changed. And that's really big.
Caroline, we also had, speaking of Chinese aggression, we also had a much-awaited UN report on China's brutality against the Uyghur Muslims. And there's nothing really in the report that we didn't already know. We know there's been arbitrary detentions. We know there's been reports of torture, sexual assault, forced sterilization and abortions. What do we make of this? The fact that the UN has said this has happened, the UN commissioner has said this has happened.
I mean, well, the details in this report were just appalling. I had the unfortunate task of sifting through it, and it was very long, very comprehensive, and it cited even more than what you just laid out, things I didn't even know about. The fact that the Uyghur minorities had to, suppress their own language. There were prohibitions against speaking their own language, forced labor, of course, sexual repression, of course, and just a laundry list of other egregious human rights violations that were unbeknownst to me, and I've covered this, over the past couple months. And Jimmy, you'd know more about this than me, but the UN supposedly has a reputation for not having any teeth. But this was a pretty slam dunk condemnation, I think, of the Chinese regime. But then again, I don't know what the implications of this are.
Yeah, so China's response obviously has been, as expected, to deny it. This is misinformation.
That's what they always do, yeah.
Always do. How does this affect the US in terms of diplomacy? When you have the UN coming out with this report, what do they have to do going forward in their relations with China?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing to know is it's an important report because it's the UN and not a specific expert within the UN or a specific country. It's the UN human rights mechanism saying, this is happening, here are these facts that we've established. The UN is late. The UN is, years late. The U.S. already determined in January 2021 that there's a genocide, that there are crimes against humanity, that the Chinese Communist Party is carrying out against Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang. And it's good that the report was released, but it was only released after the U.S. and other countries and human rights advocates pressured that official, Michelle Bachelet, the former High Commissioner for Human Rights. And she actually stepped down at the start of September. She released the report only 13 minutes before her term actually officially ended. So it's not really a profile in courage on her part, but it was the result of a pressure campaign to actually get the report out there, to get the word out. So we'll see a lot more emphasis on this going forward. But there was some Chinese interference, and they apparently watered down the report, but it'll be a big topic now.
And there were recommendations, but at the end of the report, I remember reading, but they didn't seem all that strong. They were, I think the recommendations were China should revisit its human rights conduct.
Yeah.
Very instructive.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. And if you want to check out Rich Lowry's video on student loans, you will not regret it. It's really interesting.